to bring back the core things I want everyone to gain from this is things to ask in your organization and bring back. So just a brief agenda today. Today, we're going to talk about the modern data protection. Let me move this part of my... We're going to go through some introductions. We're going to talk about top of mind, some things that are happening here in the news. We're going to go through modern data protection and kind of go a little bit through how we got here and then some questions. And if you have questions, please post them in the chat. So my name is Tim Grossish. I'm an architect and product operations manager at Atomic Data. I've been with the firm for 10 years. I am responsible for the department that runs and manages all of our products, all of our service offerings, our clouds, backup solutions, all those pieces, as well as involved with product development. I do systems architecture and design for customers of various verticals, healthcare, finance, government, pretty much everything. We don't really focus in any one particular vertical. Ryan Smith, are you on the call?
I did not see Ryan yet.
Ryan Smith, hopefully he'll be joining us. He's a solutions consultant at Atomic Data. He works with customers to help things. And the thing about, I guess, about ourselves, about Atomic Data, is we view ourselves as an IT, as a service provider. We are here to meet our clients where they are and help them achieve their goals. We are not somebody that's just trying to sell you a box and never talk to you. We are engaged with our customers, whether that's professional services, whether that's in cloud, whether that's just being your service desk or doing support and monitoring services or implementing your network. The big topic that's been come up this last quarter is cyber insurance. Been talking to a lot of customers about cyber insurance as policies have come up for renewal. There's been a lot of changes on what the requirements are for that. So we're going to start out a little with what's topical. Ransomware is become a service. Everyone, I'm sure, saw the damage that happened to the Colonial Pipeline, shutting that down, the impact and the panic buying that took place on the East Coast. And they went ahead and paid that ransom. This isn't just a niche thing. It has become a business model. You can purchase these types of software and basically try to run a business with it. It is profitable because for many organizations, paying is the often way out. And it isn't just targeted to any one industry. We have education, we have government, we have private sector, we have, your local school district is technically a target. We have hospitals. And many of these organizations, without having modern data practices in place, will pay out. There's a lot of risks, though, that go with that, making that payment. The biggest is there's no true guarantee you will get your data back, right? There's also no guarantee that they won't sell your data. Perhaps you have access to intellectual property. Perhaps you have access to data that can be used for identity theft, things like that. There's no guarantee that those things won't also take place if somebody has done some damage to your network. It can be highly disruptive to the operations. Maersk is a global shipper. They are probably one of the most prolific companies that was hit. Things didn't ship. Produce rotted in shipyards. If you're interested in reading more, Wired did a phenomenal article on that event several years ago. I would highly recommend it. But paying really just encourages this market to continue. And there's talk at the federal level that it may soon be outlawed, that if you actually go ahead and pay it, you may receive some level of fine at the federal level. And so with that in the background, what do we look at? What do we look at for protecting stuff today in a modern sense? Where are things going? So our first poll question is, does your business have any physical systems or server? And this is a yes, no, or I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to end that poll. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So it looks like the majority of our people here attending this call have physical systems. They have something that their business is responsible for, a physical asset, whether that's a server, back-end storage solution, something of that nature. One thing that we have seen, and this is all around cost, is that physical solutions, physical systems have become more and more condensed. We moved to virtualized systems. And virtualization, if for anyone here who's on a Mac, this is when you run a Windows operating system on top of your laptop or your desktop. We do this in backend, really loud, noisy data centers with servers. We end up with a single piece of physical equipment, and we run, tens, 20s of virtual machines. We can do a lot of things by doing that. And the things that why we went there, it wasn't gee, that's cool from a technology side. Again, money makes these decisions. It allowed us to have faster lead times. Many of the people on this call, if you're sitting in a CFO role or director of finance role, you would have, seen the process in the past where someone would have requested an application, which would have gotten a hardware procurement, which would have come eventually to your desk to approve the purchase. And that would delay bringing something online for 8 to 12 weeks once we had all these different steps, approvals, and whatnot. By moving to this model, we're able to bring things to market faster. We were able to reduce our overhead, both in labor as well as electric, cooling, power, floor space, and increase our resource utilization. That one's probably the one that is very noticeable. Instead of everything running at 5-10% capacity, because we had a plan for 5 and hope that we budgeted appropriately, we now can run at a higher level of capacity, greater level of utilization, better use our assets. So the second poll question I have for so we saw that 60-ish% have stuff on-prem. What percentage of you are responsible in managing your own backup and disaster recovery systems? We're pretty close. We're pretty close to split here for where do we manage the protection? Where do we manage this data? Where is it stored? We can close this poll. So how do we get here? Everyone originally did everything themselves entirely. We've now moved to doing things, leaning on vendors, leaning on service providers such as Atomic or other providers in the market. We also have moved to leaning on major cloud providers. And we've seen this transition really driven by cost as well as somewhere the technology went. If we look back to the 90s, tape was all we had. We had on-site backups. If you were really diligent, you'd make sure those tapes got brought somewhere else. Potentially you leaned on Iron Mountain or some other third-party service. And disaster recovery in the 90s would literally look like get some additional equipment, restore the data from tapes, get the systems back online. As we moved more and more record keeping from paper and operationalized things with ERPs and other solutions, suddenly tape wasn't fast enough. And so we moved to disk-based backups, which gave us the ability to replicate them. So somebody didn't have to carry something, put it in a truck, drive it somewhere, store it somewhere. And we were able to then move towards replicating systems. The virtualization allowed us to greatly speed up what we can do from a DR perspective. And then we could move into infrastructure as code, where we're literally the code is what's the most important. But this has all been driven by the cost decreasing for these solutions, the greater value coming from your backup dollar. You're getting more, you've gotten more every year, $4 spent in data protection year over year for the last 30 years. And we've also seen an explosion of data. I know that some of the CFOs and directors of ITs in various industries have seen explosion. And the customers I've worked with, I have worked with a government entity. They've seen data explode around drones and capturing data around construction sites and waterways. So when they're working on drainage projects, when they're working on road projects, they're using drone photos and video to record things. And that now is something they need to keep. It's now something they are concerned about for legal. Should something break, should a road kick out from a heavy flooding, they want to be able to go back as they're concerns around that. Healthcare, everyone wants to keep records more. It's very helpful for when you broke your arm today, and let's say you break your arm skating 10 years from now, to be able to look back at that data, your care, how it went. And in our financial sector, with the increase in compliance and regulation, there's just an increase in documentation, an increase of record keeping. And many of these industries are now keeping records for 7 years or potentially even more. All these things have really led us to having different expectations that today's miracle is, tomorrow's expectation. It used to be that you had to go somewhere for information, and now we can look it up anyway. Everyone's got a mobile phone. There is no, I have to go to a library. I have to go pick up an encyclopedia. I have to go somewhere with the internet. The answer for anything you may need is literally right there. Now, this slide, we're going to spend some time on. This slide is something that's critical for people in your role that are thinking about the cost for things. The two core objectives that come into data protection are recovery point objective and recovery time objective. Recovery point objective is how much data can we lose? How much pain can we experience? How much is it accepted to lose? So put another way, let's say we back up all of our systems once a day at midnight. Now let's say the business day starts. We have people in the office, people are doing their work, we are making sales, we are shipping product. At 3 p.m, we have some catastrophic form of corruption, we have a ransomware event, we have something that takes everything down. If we need to restore, we're going back to that midnight retention point or recovery point. We are going to lose an entire day's worth of data. For some systems, that's fine. For other systems, that is a showstopper. The other main objective that we talk about is recovery time objective. And this is related to downtime. It's how much time does it take for us to recover? So in the example we looked at earlier, so if we have our midnight retention point, things break at 3, how long does it take us to recover? Does it take an hour to recover? Are we back online at 4? Does it take us 24 hours to recover? Are we back online at 3 p.m. the next day? Does it take us a week to recover? Are we back online a week from now at 3 p.m? These two values dictate what is going to happen in the environment. They dictate our costs. And as we increase the curve, as we go up in how fast we can do something and how little data we actually lose, our costs will go up. And the takeaway I want for this group to think about is to ask these questions and be involved. I would recommend that any conversations around these objectives in backup and disaster recovery include the business itself. If these decisions are made in a vacuum by technologists, by directors of IT, by engineers especially, what often happens is they will push everything as far as the application or the systems will allow them to do. And they'll end up protecting things more at these levels, at the more expensive levels. And I've worked with customers. I worked with a customer recently that they were very technology driven. Every single system in their environment, they replicated every 30 seconds to one of the public cloud providers. That was part of their DR. They did that because the software and technologies allowed them to do that. They ran mostly privatized environment. And when they looked at changing to a cloud, moving from an on-prem environment to a pure cloud, everything is in a cloud environment, suddenly those costs get far more expensive. I've seen engineers that configure replication to happen every 5 minutes because they can, without recognizing that there's costs that may go with that for the network costs, additional performance hit to the equipment, things that may impact the end users. So when these conversations are happening around your financial systems, your ERPs, any of those applications, this is the continuum that needs to be discussed and taken care of, because not everything is mission critical and not everything's non-critical. There are certain things printing. Everyone hates printing, but printing is important, but it's not mission critical for many industries. So I've got some case studies to go through. I kind of walk through this. My first case study is around the higher education space. We work with customers that are in K through 12. We work with customers in the university space. We worked with an account that is a private university here in the United States with 2,500 students. They have 2 campus locations that are 1 to 2 miles apart. And to run their operations, it is about 300 servers with 30 core systems that are tied to revenue or tied to the core mission, teaching students. Nearly all of their students attend coursework on site or they live in on-campus housing. They do have some remote, and with COVID, everyone at the education market got to experience that, moving students to remote. But for the most part, all their students are physically there in the campus location. Now, what we looked at was doing DR for them. They did not have a true DR path. While they had 2 locations, they didn't quite have the configurations and pieces in place to survive a DR. The most important thing is there's no plan. It's very important to have a plan. And so we did some analysis on their behalf and dug through things and brought the experience we have working with multiple customers. On the left here, we have the do-it-yourself internal solution. This makes the assumption that we are going to protect every single system, every single application that they consume in their environment. This infrastructure line, this is the capital expenditure. This is all the metal, all the equipment needed to run primary site. The setup line, this is our estimated implementation labor to take all that equipment, configure it, put it all together, bring it online. This management line, this is the estimate over 60 months, over 5 years, the labor to care and feed it, to replace equipment parts when it fails, to update it, to patch it, to work with a vendor when you hit a problem with it that's on the technology side, to make adjustments to it. This first cost, this is our, it's going to be our 100% of sunk cost. These 3 first numbers, 350, 120, they add up to 470. In this budget example, if we do like for like, the secondary site costs the same as the primary site, making our costs $940,000. What we approached them with was, instead of trying to do it 100% yourself, 2 sites, manage everything, you should consider doing disaster recovery as a service. So this is leaning on a public cloud provider, a private cloud provider. You replicate your data, you replicate your systems to them. They are responsible for all the backend. So this line item, this assumes 60 months and all the costs are month to month. Many of these solutions are month to month. Infrastructure, this is the backend cost for renting the equipment. Let me go back. These first 3 line items, these assume you're still going to run everything on-prem. You're not going to run it in cloud, not going to become a 100% cloud environment. So these 3 lines are exactly the same. This bottom line, this is where it gets very interesting. So $470,000 if I run everything myself. The estimate for doing DR as a service and backup as a service for the secondary site is $345,000. And this number, what this is we back up every single system that they have, all their data. We back it up off-site. This is going to be outside of the building. It protects them against a catastrophic event to the building. And then because only 30 systems are critical that need to be on immediately, as quickly as possible for their organization, for revenue generation and having things. So the example that is probably the most common for them is their data center is on the 1st or 2nd floor. If there's flooding in a floor above, potential flooding to that data center space, takes that environment offline. Buildings are still intact. Students can still go. Network is still intact for those other sites. 30 servers we're able to bring on rapidly and still have backups and bring these servers we backed up in something, it takes longer, but bring them online in a cloud environment. Going down this path, we're looking at $125,000 of savings over the course of 60 months. Now, I'm going to look at another way to look at this, and we're going to drill into a little bit faster. And I guess before I go further, just a, I guess, quick question is have I been clear about like what the difference is between backups versus disaster recovery? Is there a general feeling that that is clear, that makes sense? Pull quickly, or not pull quickly, but thing. But I guess the difference, think of it this way: if you have your own laptop and it fails, it's corrupt, if you got to restore from backup, you got to wait 4 hours for that to happen. If we were to treat your laptop like a disaster recovery thing, you have a brand new laptop that's sitting in a box next to you. Your laptop completely stopped working. You reach over, you open the new box, open the new laptop, you start working immediately. Very different costs between the two paths. For our second case study, this is a client in the healthcare space. Today, they run on-prem production DR systems when I did this analysis. Multi-site. They have nurses and doctors in multiple physical locations. What we looked at for them was cost comparisons of doing a refresh of their disaster recovery site, just that site, versus looking at how we can do it as a service. And one of the questions that came up multiple times was, why opt for on-premise? There are reasons to opt for on-premise. You know, the needs and the cost will dictate this. I have some customers that work with very large banking institutions, and because of the compliance requirements, even though the costs say, why would you do this? It is easier for them to meet their compliance requirements if they own DR end to end. So these are questions that need to be asked for the organizations you're working with. Do you have compliance needs or requirements that may push you one way or the other? So in our healthcare scenario, for the DR site, refreshing the physical equipment and disaster recovery, $112,000 for assets, just the metal, labor to implement, $25,000, estimated ongoing maintenance across 60 months, 5 years, $60,000 for $197,000. What we put together for them was a DR as a service solution using our private cloud offerings. And we made an assumption that every single thing needed to be protected as DR as a service. That's what they were doing. We made that same assumption. These are the rental costs for the infrastructure that's all rented. And again, all these costs are by the month. 162, implementation is 4, and then this is the big saving area, is management. If they go down this path, no longer would they be responsible for labor necessary to upgrade equipment, replace hardware, deal with failures, troubleshoot it when there were problems. And the thing that they were most excited about when I worked with their CIO, this cost is 100% month to month. This is an organization that was very much interested in mergers and acquisitions. They buy a company, it's very easy to just turn the spigot up, add more systems, increase what they can do, what they can protect for disaster recovery. The other thing that they liked is that it gave them the flexibility as systems moved to software as a service solutions, which they are in the transition of moving applications to pure cloud models. This cost here on the left is sunk cost. We've got 60 months, it's amortized. This number is flexible. If I move a core application, such as their electronic health records applications, if that moves fully to cloud, suddenly I may drop this number by 5% midway through the plan lifecycle. So our third poll question, do you use Microsoft 365? It's frequently known as Office 365, or Google Workspace, formerly known as G Suite for email. So the questions are, pick one you use, I don't know, or you still manage it yourself. looks like that the majority of participants are in Microsoft 365. So we'll go through a bit about things to be aware of as we go through that. So many of you have already made some form of transition to consuming software as a service, consuming hybrid cloud services. And the reason why this is important, as I alluded to, everything is moving in this direction. And if you see XaaS, that's short for everything as a service. I didn't make that up. Somebody in marketing made that. I'm not creative enough to come up with something like that. But the core ones we've seen, the ones that people are moving to first, are things like their email. Microsoft 365 is the biggest known entity in that space, but there's other applications. Salesforce. I'm working with customers that have outsourced electronic health records. I'm working with customers that do software as a service, their financial packages. I'm working with a financial services company that one of their core applications was involved with trading on behalf of their clients. Their vendor is in the process of rewriting it to make it a software as a service solution. They expect that to be the path 2 to 4 years out from now. I work with several distribution companies. They have an on-prem ERP. That product is made by Infor, if anybody's really interested, but they're rewriting their software. They're moving it to a software as a service, and it's available now. Very few have moved to it, but many are looking at it when they're due for their next refresh, when they have to be looking at a $60,000 purchase or moving to the software as a service solution. And we see this also in our education space with our clients that are using student management applications for class registration. This trending is only continuing. And what's really driving this is this service consumption. There's a lot of pros. Microsoft 365, for everyone in this room, there was a significant security vulnerability earlier this year. If you were running on the Microsoft 365 cloud, Microsoft fully took care of this for you. You didn't have to do anything. Your IT staff didn't have to scramble. It just was done. Individuals that still ran their own mail environments built on Microsoft technologies were scrambling and patching every single system as quickly as they could. So this greatly simplifies some of your cost and management forecasting as well. Since all these tools are moving towards a monthly model, you can take an employee headcount and look at it and say, we hired a new person in our human resources department. They use O365. They use a human resources management tool. They used, some other core application. We know that, it's $30 for that application per month. It's $10 for that application per month. It's $5 for that application per month. It's very easy to associate the costs of the technology part of an employee back to their business unit, instead of it going back to this nefarious backspace by the IT department. Instead of viewing IT as a cost center, IT is just is a value. Some of the cons, there's no free lunch. Your data is at the mercy of the provider's uptime. And one thing that has happened that people, I think, have come to a strong realization is nobody's perfect and everything eventually will break. AWS has had outages, Microsoft Office 365 has had outages, Google's cloud has had outages. Every single thing given uptime will have an event and it will break. There's just something you have to accept. And the other con is you're one of millions. For many of these models, you're leaning on to a very, very large service provider. Your ability to push them is greatly decreased since they're working at such high scale. The big recommendation I have for many of these things, if you're consuming Office 365 today, I would highly recommend that you work with a cloud services partner through Microsoft, and that is somebody in your local market. They work with Microsoft on your behalf. They are technologists. You get somebody that you have a relationship with. They are going to help you as much as they can, and then they'll handle as much as they can on the back. And they have a bigger engagement with Microsoft than you will by yourself. So the fourth poll question we have are the as a service offerings you are consuming being backed up by you or by the provider?
couple more seconds, folks, on that poll, and then I'll share those results.
So it looks like many in this group that their provider, whoever they're working with, is handling the back end of the data. They're handling protecting of the data. They're handling all the care and feeding that needs to go with that. Now, the part of this that I want to go through is there is no hard and fast rule depending on the product. And so I'm going to focus a bit around Microsoft Office 365 since it's the most widely consumed software as a service path used. And I use them both interchangeably. Microsoft 365 and Office 365 are the same thing. Microsoft did some rebranding and now it's all Microsoft 365. The core thing that makes this product different is that Microsoft runs the infrastructure. They care and feed it. They make sure it's online. They worry about uptime. You are responsible for the data. You are responsible for policy. You are responsible for backing it up. And so if we were to think about this like a car, you know, if we're leasing a car, Microsoft is the shop. They're responsible for it. Maybe we got a lease with maintenance. They're taking care of the oil changes. They're taking care of tire rotations, brake changes, all that. But as the consumer of that car, you know, person driving it, I'm responsible for the insurance. And in this case, backups of that data is our insurance. And the reason why this is so critical is there's lots and lots of risk associated with the model that Microsoft has introduced. If we don't take care of it in this model, we have the risk of accidental deletion. It's really common. It can happen very easily. John Smith, Susan Smith, you may have employees in your organization that both have the same or very, very similar names. It is, the accidents happen there. Somebody may accidentally delete a mailbox, or perhaps you have somebody that is trying to make some policy changes across your entire organization. You know, that may be 100 employees, that may be 10,000 employees. When you are making changes, it's very easy to inadvertently make a change across more than what you intended. Maybe you were trying to do something just for your compliance team, and you inadvertently apply that across the entire organization. Ransomware is a thing. It is technically possible to get ransomware in Microsoft 365. It is not just an on-prem problem. It is a possibility that can happen at cloud levels. Retention gaps, policy gaps. It's very important to identify what your retention requirements are. As we mentioned earlier in the backup as a service, you have some users, mail, like your legal team, for example, that likely needs to be kept for 7 years. You have other resources in your organization that requirement isn't there, you know, or you may even have a legal team that says, I want data, I don't want data at all. I want it as little as possible. So those are things to also be considered because there are costs that go with that. Insider security threats, this isn't as common, but this is a thing. Every once in a while, there'll be a disgruntled staff and they will delete data. There's certainly legal cases that have happened related to a disgruntled staff who had access to data. And then there's hybrid setups and migrations. What we're finding, or what we found, is that it's difficult for many companies to go pure cloud, where they run everything 100% in a cloud level. It's very common to have some form of hybrid where you will run some things in cloud, you might have a few things on-prem, or you'll have stuff in multiple clouds. You'll have some stuff in Microsoft's cloud, you might have some stuff in a private cloud provider, such as Atomic, but data is going to be in there. And I guess the big thing to think about is cloud, it isn't perfect. It's same as before, but it's just somewhere else. Cloud really is just code for someone else's computer. That's all it is. Marketing got involved, but you're just renting someone else's computer to use do your business. So back to Microsoft 365 backup, there's numerous servers on the market today. If you do a Google search, you are going to find 10, 15, 20 different solutions. These are all, most of the products are tailored as service offerings. They all have different pros and cons. I've worked with customers that have various ones. Some have really, really good compliance pieces, parts of them. I worked with one for another provider that was insanely low cost. I have not seen anybody as low cost as this one solution, and it did back it up, but recovery was terrible. We had to restore a finance director in a different market's mailbox, and it took us 36 hours to pull the data out. So, always review what you're getting in these types of solutions. If you still want to run your own backup solution, all the core vendors, I put up the big three, Veeam, Commvault, and Veritas up there, they have plugins, they have solutions to back up this data. This might be even something to talk about with your compliance team. I have customers that data that is in cloud, their preference is to back it up and bring it back on site. They want it out of the cloud. It's a feeling of, I still have some control of my data that is now, I'm fully dependent on an entity. I have other customers that they're fine if it's in cloud, but they want the backup in somebody else's cloud, whether that's a private cloud such as my cloud with Atomic Data or a competing public cloud provider. Other things to be aware of are costs. Many of these paths are tied to the user or the mailbox count, the size of the mailbox, so how much storage you are going to consume. And there's lots of things that will impact those costs, such as retention. How long are you keeping the data? Perhaps there's restoration costs. Depending on the cloud provider the data may be stored with, you may have to pay to have the data out. It may be Hotel California style. You can put the data in with no cost, but pulling that data out has a cost. Others may have a service fee. So I would evaluate if you don't have a backup solution today, I highly recommend you get one. And I would recommend that you evaluate more than one. Look at both public options, look at private cloud options like Atomic that we provide, but look at what is on there. Don't just sign up for the lowest cost. You may find when the time comes you need to restore that was not a good path. And then there's always lots of considerations that go with that I've already brought up. So what are some things to take away that we can overcome the risk? I would recommend to do a data map, review where the data is located in your organization. How much of it's on-prem? How much of it is in a software as a service provider? Is there a risk that you have people in one of your departments doing something that you don't have visibility of? Are they, using a tool or putting materials in a tool that crosses your desk that you're just like, I don't know what this is. It's low cost, whatever the department head says they need that. That might have some concerns. And then use the right tool for the situation. Some of the products that are consumed for software as a service, the vendor will take care of that. They will be responsible for running the backups, having DR as part of your contract. There are others, like we mentioned, 365, you're responsible for it. And there are others where you're responsible for it, but they give you the tool. They give you the knobs to configure your backups. They give you the knobs to do your own restores. So it's very important to make sure that those things are taking place, especially around critical systems. The last case study we have is for a nonprofit. They're in the rehabilitation and counseling space. And what does moving in this direction? What does moving in a full software as a service model with Microsoft 365 and an electronic healthcare record solution look like? And we looked at this. This customer has multiple sites. They're a nonprofit. They have approximately 180 staff. There is no consistency anywhere in their IT footprint. Literally each site was, I needed hardware. We bought some hardware either from another business. We ran to Best Buy or equivalent, bought something, we plugged it in. There's multiple vendors, multiple types of equipment. A lot of it is consumer grade. A lot of it is the kind of things that you would buy to run in your house, not the kind of stuff you would run for an office that might have 10 people in a site or 50 people in a site. And this also brought up a lot of security risk and concerns because of all these different vendors, all these different pieces of equipment. And so what we looked at is, if we were to refresh this, if we were to bring a traditional environment to market for them. Infrastructure costs, all the metal, licensing, computers, storage, all that. For the size of what they needed, we're looking around $45,000. Implementation, $35,000. A lot of the implementation, the reason why the implementation is so hard is to unwind a lot of the just grab it and make it work stuff, to try to centralize things. The other thing with this model is doing it so that all the sites are linked. There is more expensive networking equipment that is needed to do this so that all the sites are linked together. And then ongoing management. There's a 180,000 is what that looks like. Now, if we look at a fully managed software as a service, this line item here, infrastructure, this still assumes a network refresh, but we're looking at lower cost equipment. We're looking at equipment that is still business grade. It's still going to have some level of service support contract on it, but it doesn't have all the features that are necessary to link the sites together that go with this. This line item also includes all the monthly licensing from Microsoft, from using backup as a service for the items. And I need to preface that the nonprofit market benefits considerably in Microsoft in the O365 space. It is very difficult to not go down the O365 path as a nonprofit. The costs are a quarter of what it is for a for-profit entity. Setup costs, we still have to set up everything, set up equipment, set up all the mail in Office 365, set up all our policies. But then when we get to management, everything is managed on the back end by Microsoft. It's managed on the back end by our backup provider. It's managed on the back end by our EHR provider. And just to look at some of the costs, if I look at like a per user cost, what we put together in this estimate was $7 per user per month for the licensing, for the O365 licensing, and then the backup licensing that went with that. The things that, your various variables, well, there's how much data are you protecting, because there'll be a storage cost with that. But by moving down this path, we greatly simplify the environment. We greatly simplify our security footprint, because now suddenly all of our security management happens in centralized locations. A centralized network management place, a centralized Microsoft 365 location, and allows them to do more for their clients. So, I have potential savings 35, but I've got a lot of flexibility in those numbers. If we hit a recession and we're impacted as a nonprofit, my costs will go down. I will unfortunately have to shed some staff. If we purchase another nonprofit, if we grow our business, I can very easily turn this up instead of having to go back to my finance team and ask, I need to buy more equipment. We just purchased a 50 user organization. They're going to help our mission statement. They don't have anything of that we can really salvage to bring them to modern standards. We're going to have to go back and make a purchase. So at this point, we'll take questions, and I'm willing to, I'll answer anything that I am able to answer. So please post those in the chat.
Thank you, Tim. We do have Ryan on the phone, and I'd like to welcome him now. He's from Autonic Data as well. Ryan, if you'd like to join us for the Q&A, that would be great.
Maybe we don't have him.
He's on the line, but he doesn't have a microphone on.
So here's the chat. Let's see what kind of questions we've got.
He's connecting with the audio right now. Let's see if we can get him on.
All right, fun technical difficulties. Tim, sorry to leave you hanging earlier on. It appears I had the wrong Zoom link, so I was sitting waiting for the meeting to start as you had kicked it off. But just wanted to introduce myself. I am Ryan Smith, solutions consultant with Autonic Data, working very closely with Tim My role at Atomic is really focused on developing and maintaining relationships and helping our clients leverage technology to add value to their customers. So helping organizations modernize their technology environment and identify opportunities to leverage technology as a strategic asset for the business. So we're pleased to be a part of FEI, and it's been a great organization to be a part of. So happy to answer any questions along with Tim here as well.
Folks, if you'd like to type in your questions in the chat, that would be great. If you have no questions, that's great too. That means Tim did a great job.
So if there are any questions, one thing to take away for the group, there is a 2021 data protection report that is available to the group here that's part of this presentation. And it'll cover some of the things that I brought up. Again, the core takeaways for this team is to go back, question costs, question items that you're seeing. Make sure that somebody that is 100% technology isn't making the decisions. I love technology. I love engineers. They are going to do, if not given a path, they are going to do what will keep them from being fired. What's the worst example of problem that you have seen? That's pretty wide. We have seen customers that have had ransomware events. We worked with a client, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago. They weren't even a client yet. They were still in some pre-sales kind of thing. Like, are we interested in changing our service provider from who they were with to Atomic, from a much smaller, more, I guess, boutique provider to us? And they were hit with a piece of ransomware that completely shut down their distribution, shut down operations for was somewhere between 24 and 36 hours. And they literally had people standing in the warehouse that couldn't ship things. And there was always this, well, are we going to get it back quick? Do we send these people home for their first shift, second shift staff? And so we stepped in. The client actually kind of almost fired the previous provider on the spot, because we were able to send, the previous provider was a 1 to 5 person style shop for size. And we were able to immediately send resources, lock down the network, and have individuals engaged for 48 hours straight as we rotated through our shifts of on-call and support personnel to recover the data. One thing that they did 2 things right in this. There were a number of things that they learned from this. They learned it's important to have secure passwords. They learned the importance of looking at 2-factor. They learned at having, limiting what has exposure to the public internet, because that's how they were compromised. The highest level of account was you could hit it from the public internet, and the password, I want to say, was 6 characters long. So that's how they were compromised. Their most critical data was thankfully in their ERP system, which was not impacted by the ransomware event, but it ties into pieces that were. So it still delayed them to being able to ship. And then their backup solution, what they had in place, thankfully was not in the same directory services. We didn't use the same login, username, and passwords as what you and I log into systems and what this admin account used. Had it been in the same path, we would be rebuilding everything from scratch. They would have been down a full week at least, potentially out of business, just because we'd had to recover everything, rebuild everything, likely look at hiring people to rekey in anything if they have paper records. It's very important to put as many layers in place to protect yourself. And I think maybe one of the questions I want to say, and Ryan, I think you know which account I'm referring to, but I want to say that the total cost for labor and getting things online and getting things moving Direct costs, I want to say, were $60,000 to $70,000 just for the get us back up and running now. Like suddenly it's a hurry, make everything happen now. And that doesn't count indirect costs from their inability to ship, inability to meet client expectations and client deadlines for getting materials to their clients because they lost ship dates.
Tim, we had another question around Office 365 and asking, since it is used by so many organizations, is it more susceptible to security issues? And are there any other aspects that an organization should be focusing on, such as two-factor authentication or password policies?
So Microsoft 365 Microsoft is the largest mail provider on the planet. They are targeted more than anyone because they have the largest software footprint in the mail space on the planet. Even though that is the case, there's a significant amount of things that can and should be done for your users and for your staff and for the businesses. The most important thing I would recommend this, if it's not in place, that it should be in place. People should be jumping up and down to put it in place, is two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, however you want to call it. In addition to having a strong password, have a requirement that every user has to either use a soft token, they have to type in a number off of a mobile phone, they have to type in, stick a key into their computer. But the most common is they have to type a number in off their phone. Like that significantly will reduce your risk surface. And then on top of that is user education and training. It's very mind-blowing. We've had customers that have had CFOs targeted. We've had customers that have had CEOs targeted. We've had customers that have wired money inadvertently to somewhere else. And putting as many processes in place that help reduce that risk, I would also recommend. So some of the things that we can do on the training and education side, there are phishing services. Atomic offers one where on a monthly or quarterly basis, we send an email to our client, to their mailboxes that appears to be a legitimate email. It looks like, hey, I'm offering you free food from Bite Squad. Hey, I'm prompting you to log into Office 365 because you get prompted a lot in the Office 365 space. Hey, look like, a document signing application that you use in your organization. And what we do is we, provide that, and we work on training and keeping it top of mind for end users for things to look at, to how to spot that something isn't quite right. I hover over the link. Oh, that really isn't going to Amazon. That really isn't going to Microsoft. As well as training for C-levels and recognizing, if there's a sense of urgency, pick up the phone. Some of our clients, they've put in place process that for money transfers over a certain amount, paying payroll, like a physical phone call and validation of a security password has to happen. Like there is no way that event can happen until those things have taken place. So there's a lot of things that can be done to put bumps in the road that will slow down and reduce those risks. But without those, it's the right person targeted at the right time where they miss something could very easily, transfer $75,000 out of their organization and not realize that it was fraud. And very often it is not possible to get that back.
Good points there. Tim, another question that came up, wondering about password repositories or personal password keepers, if you will. Do you have any thoughts around that? Would you see maybe in your personal and in the business side?
Yeah, well? I would highly recommend in both cases, personal as well as business, to use a password safe. There's a lot of products in the market. There's 1Password, there's LastPass, there's KeyPass, there's a myriad of products, but what they all do is you have one really, really long password that gets you into it. This is your primary password. Typically it's a phrase, maybe you pick your favorite song, there's a line in that song, you use that line in song, it's a lot of characters. The most important thing is the line of characters. an extra step then would have two-factor into that. And then that tool contains all the passwords for everything you use. It'll you'll create unique passwords that are different for every single application. And that's really, really important, because at this point, you just assume that something's going to be compromised. And maybe it's the place you buy dog food from. If that password and that email address you use to register is compromised, they will certainly try to hit all the most common places: Target, Amazon, Best Buy. If they can figure out who you are, maybe try to figure out where your finances are located. So it's very important to have unique passwords for everything that are as long as you can. And use a password manager, because that'll help you use long passwords that you don't know. Like for passwords that we use on the business side, there's tools that are multi-user. The only password I only know two passwords. I know the password to get into my computer, which gets me into my password safe for access to all my user passwords for systems I use at Atomic and with customers. And then the password manager I use personally, I know one password. I have no idea what the password is to my banking. I have no idea what the password is to Amazon. I have no idea what the password is to anything other than that master password safe. Any other questions?
That does seem to be the end of our questions. If anyone else has a question, please feel free to enter it in the chat. We are just about at the top of the hour. We do appreciate your time, Tim and Ryan. What an awesome information segment. I certainly had making notes constantly about passwords, etc. But yeah, this was excellent.
Thank you all for your time. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to go through modern data protection and things you can look at for both your, the businesses you work with, your own business, and your own personal life.
Again, thank you very much, Tim and Ryan. This is the end of the webinar presentation. We wish you the best of the morning and have a great day.